have been generated using different types of prompts, and a lot to do with it. So we've asked AI to illustrate what we're going to talk about. So just a little bit kind of sort of background there. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about the environmental impact of AI, a little bit about some of the biases, some of the ethics, and then we're going to finish it up by talking a little bit about how that applies to kind of educational sessions. So if I hand it over to Sam, he's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the environmental impacts.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Caroline. I mean, this is kind of the first pillar, if you like, in exploring the sort of social, if you like, impact of generative AI. And it's the thing that kind of surprises people, I think, the most. I mean, I say surprises people, it surprises people just at the sort of sheer scale of the amount of energy that generative AI kind of takes to use. And it's sort of one of those things that is a bit of a combination of entrenched ideological perspectives on how technology kind of works, and the fact that it sort of works its way very quickly, into everyday sort of consciousness. I think it's something that, it emerged a couple of years ago, maybe 18 months ago. It was kind of a novel thing, and actually, I think at this point, it's worked its way into kind of the everyday uses of technology so quickly that I hesitate to say that we probably couldn't live without it, but at the same time, it'd be quite a gap, I suppose, in the way that we access technology now. But its environmental impact is something that's still very much under discussion and is under discussed. And that's probably something that needs redressing. At least we think so. And so on a kind of wider and more holistic scale, the global data centers that kind of power generative AI models, be that OpenAI's ChatGPT or Microsoft's Copilot or Bing's Gemini, they're all kind of like very much of a muchness, and they consumed around 1% of the world's electricity in 2021, and that's kind of, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but the kind of global output for electricity is enormous, and 1% of that is obviously it has a massive impact, and the demand for that is only going to increase. And as I said a minute ago, there are sort of questionable decisions being taken in sort of how data centers are kind of being set up and where they're being set up and the kind of technology that's used to cool them. One thing that isn't on this slide, I think that's probably something worth mentioning at this point, is just how much water data centers kind of take to keep themselves cool, and the amount of people that water could otherwise sustain is obviously something that we need to consider as well. And the demand in the kind of electricity usage for generative AI in the USA, at least, is predicted to rise to 6% by 2026. And obviously there is a kind of disparity, if you like, in how data centers operate. So 97% of Google's data centers in Finland are carbon free. So there's a kind of geopolitical, I should say, sorry, dimension to think about. So where a data center is being set up, what are the kind of regulations that exist in that kind of local space to change the way that data center functions? Compare the Finland example there, 97% of that is carbon free in Finland, but only 4 to 18% are carbon free in Asia at the moment. And choices are kind of being made, where to set these data centers up, and the kind of local political climate obviously has quite a lot to do with it. But if these are hot places, it seems silly to set up a data center in Death Valley, but that's the kind of thing that's happening. And obviously then that kind of moves us forward to sort of CO2 emissions and the amount of energy that AI actually uses to function as well. So a search engine query, your standard Google search emits 0.2 of a gram of CO2, whereas AI can be anywhere between 1 and 10 grams of CO2, depending on the complexity. And the amount of energy that AI uses to function is one of those things it surprises anyone who I actually kind of challenge anyone to not be surprised at the amount of energy it takes. So creating an image using generative AI, so that could be using Midjourney or ChatGPT itself, uses the same amount of energy as charging a mobile phone. And I wasn't sure about this claim. I kind of heard this claim before the session today a couple of times, and I went sort of rooting around to see if I could actually find something to back that up. And it is true. Apparently, it does take that much energy to use to generate a picture, the same amount of energy that it would be to otherwise charge a kind of standard mobile phone. And it kind of extended that recently, generating 1,000 images using generative AI emits the same amount of CO2 as driving an average petrol-powered car for 4.1 miles. And if you just kind of think about the amount of pictures that are being generated at any one time, it sort of very quickly stacks up, and it kind of puts it into perspective just how much CO2 generative AI may actually be producing. And I did hear a comparison that it produces more CO2 than the aviation industry. And the question obviously is whether we kind of have a position to fill. Do we kind of explore this technology? And this is a very open question that we'll come on to in a sort of discussion section in a second. Do we have a responsibility to explore this technology, incorporate it into our research, critique it, examine it, tear it to shreds if absolutely necessary? We know this is the higher education space. This is a space where that happens in any kind of social dimension. But at the same time, do we also have to balance our own environmental impact? And what do we tell our students, I think, as well is another kind of dimension, if you like, to that question. And that kind of human perspective, thinking about our students, thinking about the way we use generative AI, thinking about the way that it could probably develop and the impact it's going to have on society as a whole, brings me nicely onto the role of the kind of human verifier. So the data sets that exist within generative AI systems are the thing that is reflected back to us when we use the generative AI. So people often say that ChatGPT is biased. It reinforces biases. I mean, the system itself is flawed, but it's the data set within it that's biased. And what normally happens, or not what normally happens, what has happened frequently is that the data set contained within the system is manually kind of uploaded and moderated, often by very poorly paid and very in very exploitative positions. So, for example, £50 pay, for 9 hours work by 2 people, and there are examples of exploitative practices going on in the global south. So having to kind of look through very uncomfortable material that often reflects prejudices back at people in order to maintain these systems. And there are human people kind of behind the system, I think, as well. So there are severe environmental impacts to generative AI, and there is a position for universities within this kind of space. And that's something that we kind of wanted to start the discussion with for this session. So Caroline, if you just move the slide forward for me, is that okay? Just to the next one. There we go. Yep. So what we wanted to do was kind of have a bit of a discussion about this potential environmental impacts and the considerations that us as a university and we as academics should, kind of have, and how we use generative AI and how we balance the need for exploration of this technology with our, the carbon footprint that it kind of emits. So we've put a Padlet together for us to kind of answer these questions and to have some discussion around this topic. And I'm going to put a link to the Padlet in the chat, so the environmental impact of AI. So that link should be there. And there's really 3 questions for you to think about and to sort of comment on. So how can the academic community balance demand for cutting edge AI research with the need to minimize the carbon footprint of computational resources? And do we have a responsibility to do that? I think is an extension of that question. I think it was Bristol a few weeks ago, kind of the students kind of led it, as far as I'm aware. There was an overall kind of institutional wide rejection of using generative AI in any kind of capacity whatsoever, simply because of its ethical dimensions. But it requires everyone to buy into that decision. And is that something that we could formalize, or is it something that we should consider, or is that the wrong way to go about the technology because everyone else is going to be using it, and therefore we have a responsibility to do so as well? It's a difficult question to answer. And should we consider reducing our use of AI to increase our kind of own sustainability as well to achieve sustainability? And that was they were the 2 kind of main pressing questions. But we also wanted to know if there are any other perspectives on this as well. So do please comment on that. We'll take maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes just to kind of present your thoughts, and then we'll feed back. And if anyone's got any comments or anyone wants to contribute anything verbally, please do raise your hand, use the chat, just shout out. That's perfectly fine. Any thoughts so far? Oh, here we go. So some things are coming up. I might share the Padlet so we can see, so everyone can see. Caroline, I'm going to have to. Would you mind sharing it? There we go. You can see it now. It saves you stopping and then me coming on. Okay. It's that silent, awkward moment, isn't it, when everyone's typing? Collaboration between institutions, that's a good idea. Yeah, okay. Prioritization, yeah. That's an interesting idea as well. Yeah, is it a legitimate reason to use the AI rather than just generating a silly picture of the Pope in a jacket? Yeah, absolutely true. Need to be a general consensus. Well, that's true. So who determines what's a kind of serious use of AI versus a trivial one, as it were? That's a good point. The risk of not exposing to AI is too high. Yeah. Will disadvantage graduates in the future. I've made that point myself whenever I've done a session on the university's position on artificial intelligence. I kind of point directly at the Liverpool curriculum framework and say digital fluency is a thing on the Liverpool curriculum framework. And if we're not talking to students about AI, then they're not becoming digitally fluent. And in the back of my mind, whenever I do that, I always say to myself, digital fluency is one thing, but the earth being on fire is something else. And I didn't know how to reconcile that. So I mean, it's interesting that we're obviously making the same points here, but I still don't have an answer. We are saying to our students, we're going to make you digitally fluent, but at the same time, don't use this thing because, nebulous reasons, I suppose, that are absolutely legitimate, but that we find very hard to kind of justify when everyone else is doing it. Explore new energy solutions rather than AI use. Yes, I think that's a fantastic idea. I hope something um, can meet our kind of energy requirements that doesn't kind of have that kind of long-term potential danger, I think. Yep. Important to educate people on their impact on the use of tech in general. Yes, I think that's a really good point. Everything we do, the classic one is kind of printing something, isn't it? You think, oh, that's going to have such an environmental cost. I'll do it on a Word document instead. But that makes you feel like you're doing something sustainably when that actually has an environmental or sustainable cost as well. And they're far less visible. We had a discussion in CIE a while ago about going back to paper notebooks because they actually end up being more sustainable in the long term because of the amount of energy that using a laptop or any piece of technology is going to have. And I'd be curious to know how much more energy you're using if you have multiple screens on your desk, he says, looking at his second screen. But that's a very good point. Okay. Oh, there's so much here. Make people aware of the environmental impacts. Yes, even a GIF. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to stop using GIFs now. Sorry, anyone who I've ever sent a GIF to. I'm definitely not going to stop using GIFs. Sorry. Conveying the impact of using AI is easy to understand terms. Yeah, use it carefully. Not saying don't use it. Just think about the cost. Yes, absolutely true. So do you actually need to? I think that's a very good point. Geopolitics. GenAI is just one of many examples where the true underlying geopolitical issues are emphasized. Yes, the underlying problems are often political. 100% true. Scorched Earth. John. Yeah, thank you. Worth a read. Hope that's on my reading list. Thank you so much to whoever recommended that. Sorry, I'm scrolling on this screen here, so I can see what you're saying. Technology progresses because we consume it. Reduce the consumption, we'll witness a slowing down its relentless progress. Is that a good thing? Perhaps buying time to think about its ethical impact. Yes. Help people make informed decisions. Yeah. Reducing its use for image and video generation. Definitely. I assume text generation is much less energy expensive. Yeah, I think it is.
I think so. And I think the informed decisions is the really key part.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
It's, actually understanding what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So interestingly, towards the end, I'll show you some of the ones that didn't work. But the nice images that we've got in this presentation were not the first ones that it came up with. So although you might say, well, I've got a PowerPoint presentation with X number of pictures, that impact is perhaps much higher because you will have gone through many other iterations of those trying to get the image that you were looking for.
Absolutely. So that actually kind of ties nicely in with this idea of using AI or being literate with the technology and exactly how it works, because you're more likely to get the result you want the first time if you know exactly what it's doing. And how to kind of craft that prompt, if you want to call it that, to get the result you want, rather than kind of blindly going in and saying, give me an image, but giving it very few parameters, being very non-specific, being quite vague and not really knowing what it is you want. So, it's not only about the number of times you use it and also about how you use it, but it's about how sparing you are and how targeted you are in your use of the technology as well to try and reduce that impact. But I think you're right. I think the key point is making it very clear and kind of raising awareness. I mean, that phrase is overused, and it tends to be one of those phrases that makes people go, yeah, I'm already aware, and you're not. But it's not just about generative AI either. It's about all technological use. There are kind of certain acts that you take part in society, I suppose, that have a very obvious environmental impact. So you're driving your car, you choose public transport instead. Okay, sorry, someone's calling. I'm just going to have to hang up on that. Yeah, you make deliberate choices because there are acts, if you like, that exist within our lives that have a very vocal, a very obvious, or very broadcasted environmental impact. And as I say, taking a private jet, or even just kind of flying in general, that they have, that's kind of in vogue. But there are acts that we sort of take for granted, or things that we do on an everyday basis, where we just don't think about that. So I think it's yes, in the context of generative AI, absolutely make people aware of the exact impact that it's going to have. And as we've said, it's easier to say it takes as much energy to generate a picture as it does to charge a phone than it does to sort of quantify that in number terms, because it becomes meaningless. But we should perhaps do that with everything. And more things just sort of outside AI as a space as well. I think that probably would make people more aware of the exact environmental impact that they actually have, and they'd probably be quite surprised at how high it is. Okay, a couple more. A worry. We can do so much by saying that staff and students need to have the info to make informed choices. What if they persist in making bad ones? That's true. We can't make them do it. We are value-driven institutions and who steer and lead as well as inform. Yes, that is true. So we need to say exactly what it is that you're doing, and also what you should do. As you say, we can't make them do it, but we can showcase good practice. Browsers started to return AI results when a simple search is made. This is making me want to search less. It does drive me insane. I have to say, it's if I could uprate that, I would, because I think that's absolutely true. Okay, I'm very conscious of time, and I know we've got a lot to get through.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
it is. So
thanks for that.
That actually brings me on quite nicely to the points that I was going to make about bias. So we all know that the AI models are biased, but there are lots of different kind of biases that we need to think about. So it basically breaks down into two sort of main things. So one of them is the kind of inherited bias. So it's important to note that AI itself is not inherently biased, but AI can only give you what it is trained on. And those decisions that it makes will affect what it outputs and how it does it. So, oops, sorry. So, essentially, where they're getting the data from. So we've got policies within the university about the kind of data that we can collect, how we can collect it, and what we can do with it. But when that data is put into an AI model, in a lot of cases, it's this black box, and we don't know where it's going to, and we don't know where it's coming from. There's also the issue of human labelers, human checkers. So as AI increases, there's an even greater need for that to make sure that this information is there. And one of the problems with that is that you sometimes asking people to do things and to check things and then relying on that output. So you've also potentially got any bias that comes from what those people are supplied and those decisions that those people are making. It's also because of the way that it's designed, the more it returns something that gets rated as good, the more it will use that. So I don't know if anybody else has had this, but one thing I find is that sometimes AI gets stuck with an idea. So you asked it to generate something, and because of things earlier on in the conversation, it will then go back to that and keep giving you the same information in a different way. So one of the issues to do with this is to do with the training data that it's got. So photos is quite a good one. So in America, they've used photo recognition, and that's been trained for some of the AI models. But essentially, the photos that they've used to train the AI models are overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly white, which means when you're asking the AI model to generate an image, it will be very stereotypical in what it does. So I've been generating some images for an lecture on autism. However, when I've asked it to generate me a class, I've got American white males in stereotypical classroom settings. When I've asked it to be more diverse and include disability, I've got wheelchairs. And that is to do with how it's been programmed. So knowing what prompts to use will help. The other issue is that we end up confirming our own biases. So we have to remember that all AI is doing is taking information it's been fed and rearranging it in a different way. So what's likely to happen is you input something and it confirms the bias that you have. It will continue to give you those kind of things. And we, in our own biases, can end up actually prompting the AI in such a way that it will include that. So the AI comes both from the input but also from the user. And we need to be very aware in what we're generating, how those biases are actually contributing to it. So again, when it's trained on things like literature, and we've got a really great session coming up on Friday about using it for literature reviews, that literature has those same biases that academic literature has. And it's something that we need to be aware of when we kind of think about it. The other problem that the AI has got is it doesn't have that contextual understanding. So although it is generating things and it is giving us answers, that is literally all that it is doing. It doesn't have that contextual understanding, so it cannot abstract from the ideas that it is generating to create new material. It can only give us back what they've done. And one of the problems, you may have seen this, it has been used all over the place, is that some of the data that is used with AI is coming from sources that are not reputable. So this is one that shows that where the AI has been fed information, it's been fed information from Reddit. Now, Reddit is a fantastic resource. I use Reddit all the time, but it can't tell the difference between satire and non-satire. So any sensible person reading the Reddit post would realise that this is satire, and they wouldn't consider using glue in it. However, AI didn't realise this, so for a while it was there. I'm very sorry to report that it no longer does that. So somebody has realised, and now if you ask it if you should use glue, it tells you that that is a very bad idea and not to do it. But that particular thing came because people noticed it. In other cases, the danger is that that misinformation perpetuates through the system, and because people are not aware of it, it then becomes part of our understanding and our beliefs when actually it hasn't occurred at all. And that's, quite a thing that we need to be very aware when we're using AI, what the limitations of it are. And that brings us on to some of those ethical considerations. So we need to think quite carefully when we're using AI about the kind of decisions that we're making and what basis we're making those on. So I can input all of my research to AI and ask it to help me write something, but I've no idea where I'm sending that research if I do. I've no idea how that's going to be used in the future or by what. So I certainly would advise against anybody using personal data, any intellectual property, unless you are happy for that to be freely available. This also raises, in the academic context, the consideration of the different aspects that we might be inputting. So, using it to generate a response to an email to a student, it can help if you're trying to word something, but we also need to consider whether we're inadvertently sharing details that we perhaps shouldn't. AI generally is a bit of a black box. We don't know what happens to the material. We don't know what may happen to the material in the future. There's also the question of accountability for decisions, and this is a really, really big one. So if I make a decision based on something that AI has told me, and AI will confidently tell you things as facts, even when it hasn't actually developed that, who is accountable for that decision? So, if, for example, it tells me to add glue to my pizza and then I make myself sick, who should I be holding responsible for that? So one of the things when we're talking to our students about this is we need to make sure that they are checking the information that it gives them, because it will hallucinate and it will provide misinformation. So there's a lovely example that Claire from CIE mentioned the other day that I really liked, and I gave it a try yesterday, which is to ask it to give me a holiday plan for Toxteth. So my daughter lives just by the Women's Hospital, so I thought this would be a bit of fun. So I asked it to give me a week's trip to Toxteth. And some of the things it gave me were absolutely fine. It suggested that, I walked around the Baltic Triangle and I could go to Camp and Furnace. I could go to the Palm House. These were great. It also suggested that I spent the afternoon in Toxteth Library. And that is actually closed. It has been for a while. The building is lovely. If you're ever in Wavertree, it's just on Picton Road. It's a beautiful building, but it's not publicly accessible. It also suggested that I visited a vibrant arts venue, and suggested that the Philharmonic was a vibrant art value, and that I could dine there and do all kinds of other things. So again, Philharmonic, a great pub, but it's not particularly renowned for its art. So what it had done was it had confounded Philharmonic Hall and the Philharmonic pub as one single thing. So we need to be aware when we're thinking about AI and working with AI, we need to think about these hallucinations, misinformation, and what happens. Particularly in an academic context, we are quite good at spotting where something is broadly wrong. But if we happen to miss that in our marking, and the student continues believing that that piece of information is correct, where does the responsibility lie for that? So this is unashamedly stolen from the Open University because I think this is a lovely example. So this is the slide that has a human generated picture and an AI generated picture. So I'd like you to say which one you think is AI generated. So if I can get somebody to pop in the chat which one they think is AI generated. So the second one. Both. Left. The blonde girl is human. First one has the correct number of fingers. Oh, so real mix there. So it is indeed the blonde girl that is human generated. The second one was AI generated, and what we did was we asked AI to create a picture of a girl with a cat based on the style of Walter Keane. So what this did was, I think it did quite a nice job. So you can see that the style is somewhat similar and it's created it. Now, what is interesting about this is that Walter Keane didn't actually paint the blonde girl. His wife did. So this was quite a famous case. You can go and look it up. And what happened was they went through, he was a famous artist who produced all of these pictures, and they went through a very nasty divorce. And his wife said, actually, I painted these pictures. And the court said, you need to prove it. You both draw a picture. And when he couldn't, it was obvious that his wife did. So the point that I want to make is twofold. So firstly, we can't always tell what is AI generated, what isn't. And as the AI becomes more sophisticated, we need to be teaching our students to work with these tools rather than relying on our ability to spot which one we think is AI generated. The second one is that students and other people are always going to cheat in some way or another. All AI does is it helps us develop those ways of doing it and how we're doing it. So I think we need to move away from this idea of students are just using AI to cheat, to violate academic integrity, and more towards a thought of how are they doing so, and how can we support them to be doing the academic side with various ways of acting that are both ethical and sustainable. So there's the reference if anybody would like to look up the case, but I think it's a really nice example to look at. So I'm going to hand you back over to Sam, and on the note of academic misconduct, there's a lovely quote, which is that academic misconduct is a symptom, not the problem. So I'm going to hand you back to Sam, and then we're going to do our other Padlet.
Yes, thanks so much, Caroline. And that last point about talking to students about exactly what they're doing with artificial intelligence and sort of talking to them about kind of being open about what they're doing with it, how they're using it, what they're asking it, for what purposes are they using it? Are they using it in the construction of an artifact? Are they using it in helping to sort of source information? There's a real sense that to this point, I think that any use of AI is bad, and the greater the amount of AI use, the worse the crime. And that's the kind of perspective that we need to start moving away from. I think Caroline's absolutely right. It needs to be far more nuanced. It needs to be more focused on what you're using it for and whether that's something that's actually the right kind of thing to do, as it were. And are you using it in the right context? And are you using it in a way that helps you to develop your own knowledge, or to help to sort of cement your own knowledge? And how have you kind of reflected on that, and how do you understand what the technology has done, right? Because we've also sort of focused quite a lot on what students are doing with the artificial intelligence to produce something else. But the real question is, do you actually understand what the artificial intelligence is doing when you ask it to do something? And so, because you can't kind of ask it to do something for you and then just trust what comes out the other side. You need to understand the process that it's gone through to generate the thing that you're then using in your work. And that, is a kind of something that we'll discuss tomorrow in the AI and assessment redesign session. So do please come along to that if you're interested in this kind of aspect of it, or the AI in policy, or the university's policy session that I think Claire is running tomorrow as well. But we are going to kind of talk a little bit about that now. So we do have another kind of Padlet exercise for you to do. So I'm also going to put the link to that one in the chat. But this one is geared a little bit more towards using artificial intelligence in a kind of authentic, meaningful, and sustainable way. And what we're really interested in finding out from everyone here is their thoughts on how we kind of include more authentic and meaningful tasks using artificial intelligence to help prepare our students for their future careers. So, what kinds of things can we get them to do that would kind of make an authentic use of artificial intelligence, and to use it in kind of more meaningful capacities, and in ways that they're probably going to be using it in their post-graduation contexts. And again, I've said to hundreds of people that I hate the use of the word real world, because we're not in the real world. But in their post-graduation spaces, they'll be using artificial intelligence in lots of different ways and in lots of different professional capacities and potentially personal ones as well. How can we best prepare them to do that while we've got them with us, I suppose? Authenticity. I'm unsure what this word means here. I'm unsure what that word means every day. That's the bane of my existence. But in a way that kind of makes sense for their future context. Yeah, so it could be something connected to your discipline. It could be something connected to their research. It could be something that connects to their wider lives. It could be something connected to their employability or their kind of social position, or whatever it is. Something that they're going to find useful in a post-graduation context. And the other kind of question that we're interested in finding out the answer to, or your thoughts on, as well as part of this discussion, is how can we as a university kind of consider the long-term plans or impacts, of AI, and how can we plan for its effective use in the longer term? So at the moment, it's very kind of novel. It's kind of everywhere, actually. And there is this weird, I think, balance between using artificial intelligence, or generative AI, sorry, in a conscious way, going to ChatGPT or to Gemini or whatever kind of software students are using, and making a kind of conscious use of that, and saying, ChatGPT, please do this thing for me, and then you take the response, and that goes somewhere. And then using it in a kind of unconscious way as well. So it exists within the search. Someone pointed out earlier on, we're seeing artificial intelligence kind of work its way into Google search results or Bing search results or whatever it is. And we might be taking bits out of that and saying, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know that. And you just sort of imbibe that sort of naturally. So what can we as a university do to kind of anticipate the long-term impacts and the long-term position of AI? And how can we kind of work that into our curriculum? And how can we kind of plan for it, particularly referencing back to our thoughts about sustainability as well? Is this something that we can consciously embed into our curriculum and make ourselves aware that students are always going to be using it, and that we're probably always going to be using it to plan things as well? Welcome to the desert of the real world. Yeah, very true. Higher education is not The Apprentice, and neither is the real world. No, I suppose it's not. Because The Apprentice is I mean, even the images from The Apprentice are a lie. They're not actually in the gherkin, I imagine. Staff members should be trained on how to use AI and give AI tools proper prompts. Yes, I agree with that. Very good. Have AI tools answer assignment questions and students critique the generated answer? Yep, we've seen lots of that. So at the moment, we're running a research project where we're sort of doing a talk aloud exercise with participants, where they bring an assessment they've got on one of their modules, and then they get AI to do it as if they were a student trying to kind of get the AI to do the assessment for them, and we sort of break down what it's done well and what it hasn't. And part of the sort of study is to work through ways that AI could be incorporated into that assessment process, or how the assessment could be adapted so that it doesn't matter if students use AI, or they could use it in an interesting way. And actually, something that I've noticed in quite a few of those little chats is that there's always a sort of part of the assessment where the AI could be really useful to generate something that students could then discuss or critique or talk about. And that's quite a useful thing to do. And actually, or generate a scenario, or generate a case study, or generate something that the assessment then kind of bounces off, which can be really, really useful. Apart from anything else, if you're asking students to critique a kind of example of the assessment, get AI to generate one that's obviously bad, and then get students to point out why it's bad. And that means you're not worrying too much about either making it yourself or using previous students' work. Teach students how to use it effectively. Yep. Breaking down larger or complex tasks. Yes. Students reflect on problem-based scenarios, use and generate protocols to move forward. In medicine, we've launched our first AI patient. Oh, I love that. Character scenario feedback rubric's been carefully built. So yeah, using it in a sort of medical capacity. What, in a case of sort of diagnosing something, it presents symptoms, they diagnose it, that sort of thing. If so, that sounds very cool. Giving students opportunities to create what they pull out from AI. Yep. How Gen has been used as a tool to speed up work. Yeah, I think we haven't talked too much about that at this point. The difference between using it to create something and using it to help speed up a process, I think, is important to note. There is a world of difference between those two things. Help me write this more quickly versus write this for me are two very different processes, and one side of it is obviously much more preferable than the other. So the second column, we need to accept the impact is as big as when Google is released. How we search for information has changed forever. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be putting some people off searching at all from what the conversation has been so far, because it's sort of there in search results. But I think the other kind of point to note is, obviously, Caroline was absolutely right before when she was saying about how AI kind of homogenizes all of its data set and compresses that down into something far less obviously referenced than a set of search results. It presents you a kind of prosified or collaged set of search results that is in a short kind of form, if you're using a text-based one, that is. And it doesn't tell you where it's got that information from unless you're using a specific kind of generative AI that does. And so it is a Google search, but a lot of the time users at the moment still don't know that that's exactly what it is. It looks like content creation rather than searching for information. So yes, how we search for information has changed forever, but at the moment, I think part of the point is that we need to actually make people aware that what they're doing is searching for information, not creating something. And that's part of our responsibility, I think. Yeah, long-term impacts, paying for stuff. When they approved to benefit student learning, budget is going to be needed. Yes, that is very difficult in the current climate. They're also extremely expensive, even for enterprise licenses. The effective use should be taught on all courses, like there are all types of tools and resources. Using it as a skill should be integrated into education. Absolutely agree with that. Lots of academic skills courses are now kind of incorporating AI use into them. So you're referencing, using the library, searching for sources, creating bibliography, using AI. It seems to fit quite nicely in that space. The adaptation of policy and law to make AI fit. There's no getting ahead of it now. Break the law, change the rules. Interesting. I like that. Provocative. Every time we use generative AI, we legitimize an unethical tool, yes, which is fundamentally a money-making techno-capitalist fantasy. Probably couldn't have put it better myself. We should kick it off campus the same way we would the extremists and lobby to build a less evil version. Yeah, I mean, the technology exists. That's a very $6 million man reference. It does exist. We could, there is space to do something with the way it works as opposed to the data set that's contained within it. That's an interesting perspective, and I like that.
I think sorry,
go on.
To interrupt, I was just going to say on that, I think the university is looking at its own kind of in-house ones where we can control a little bit more, and that I think that also that does link into the financial side. One of the other Padlet comments was on the financial side.
Yeah.
One of the things we need to consider with this is that digital divide.
Yeah.
Not all students will be able to afford the premium version of the tool. Therefore, it's not fair on a kind of equitable basis in that response, and that's something we do need to consider when we're incorporating them in our teaching.
Absolutely. The only institution I'm aware of, I think, at the moment that's sort of developed its own version, if you like, of a generative AI that tends to explore its own resources and provides kind of like an AI assistant to help navigate VLEs and the course documentation and the module specs or the program handbook or something like that is BPP, and presumably that that's an institution that has the money to be able to do it. As far as I know, it's working quite well, but it's an interesting idea, developing your own generative AI that can do certain tasks and perform them in a particularly institutionally focused context is quite a good idea. I think it's something we can definitely explore. And as Caroline says, it does kind of get around that problem of who's using what AI and actually the question that comes up quite a lot is which is the AI that's kind of approved for use by the university. And at the moment, there sort of isn't one because there isn't a licensed one that the university is using because A, they're expensive, and B, we're not sure about the ethical implications of saying that we approve of you using this. And that's before we even get into the kind of academic perspective as well. I imagine there'll be quite a lot of people across the institution that say, what on earth are you doing, basically sanctioning this? So it's difficult for us to kind of do that. But having our own one would probably be a way of getting around that. There's a couple of other points that have just jumped in. Engaging with employers, yeah, I'm glad that's come as well. Find out how grads will use it in their professional context and prepare them to use it in that way. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea. If we get some alumni back, maybe after a couple of years of them using AI to see how it's actually kind of impacted that sector, that would be, I think, a really good move for some disciplines as well. I think that's everything. Any other points from anyone in the chat? I'm just going to bring that up.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a really good one from Megan talking about using it to practice professional communication skills. So using the scenario of an angry patient to stay in hospital for treatment.
Yeah.
So letting them, actually deal with those kind of sort of difficulties that clinical staff might face.
Fantastic idea. Yeah, using it for role play is a really interesting perspective. So I love that idea. And yeah, and that's an uncomfortable or a necessarily uncomfortable way of developing those skills, but in a sort of safer kind of space. Copilot in Edge is the only one ring fencing data within MWS. Yeah, absolutely. We could use humans for role play. Actors need work. Can we pay them, David? That's the question, I think. Do we have the money to be able to do that? A little. We can pay them a little. Okay, we'll buy them lunch. Beans, genuinely beans. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Okay, that's thank you ever so much to everyone for your contributions to that. That's been really interesting, and I'll just hand back to Caroline to finish the session off. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we've had quite a wide-ranging sort of discussion, and we've only been able to do a broad brush. So any of those topics, ethics, sustainability, bias, literally could have been an hour session. So we're aware that we would have missed some stuff off. But what I did want to do was just show you one of the issues that AI is still having, which is this. It has real difficulty where it ends up with text in. These are a couple that don't contain swear words. Getting it to do something that has the word difficulty in it consistently results in swear words, and that must be to do with how it's actually been trained. But when you ask it to remove all of the text, it doesn't know that there is text there. So it will generate. So both of these are ones where I said, I like the picture, but can you remove the text? And it came back and went, here's one with the text removed. And it just has different text on it. So it's generating an image, but again, in terms of all of the images that it's generating, it doesn't know what it's generating or why. Particularly if you ask it to change aspects, in some cases what it does is it puts more in. So again, this one, what I was trying to do was to get it to take one of the brains off and change it for something else, but it couldn't get it. It just kept giving me, here's one with less brains. So a little bit of training in terms of students on how to prompt it for the information, I think is really important. So that was pretty much everything that we wanted to cover. As I say, it's a very, very broad brush one. Out of interest, the first picture that I used here of the head, I wonder if anybody can spot the style. So in that one, I asked AI to generate me an image of sustainability and ethics in a particular artistic style. Yeah. So it refused to do a Van Gogh one, but it did do an Impressionist one. So it's getting around some of the copyright there quite neatly, because, you know, instantly in the text there, everybody knew exactly who that is. So again, it's all very well saying that it's been programmed not to do certain things, but you can very quickly and easily get around those if you use the right prompts. So does anybody have any questions?
Stunned into silence.
Hiya, I'm Meg. I can't find my hand up. Is it okay to ask a question?
Of course.
So I apologize if you covered this at the beginning because I did join late. But my question is how do people find out exactly how much environmental impact they're having? So will different AI tools are going to have different models in the background, different processing power, their data centers are going to be in different places. So, and companies at the moment are not required to provide statements about the environmental impact of their particular platform. So how can your everyday consumer or your university employee who's responsible for the procurement of an AI platform find out about this information?
It's very difficult. So I wanted to finish this presentation with how much environmental impact creating this presentation had had. So I put it together in an afternoon and I asked it repeatedly in lots of different ways how much it had used. And the AI model just didn't know that because they, you know, they've not been programmed with that. It is very much a black box.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is estimated on a kind of aggregate.
Yeah. I wonder if there will be you know, policy change in companies that move in this direction, you know, in the same way as the building industry has, you know, got tools and models for calculating the impact of, you know, materials and buildings, you know, supply chains.
I would hope that they would, but at the moment, I'm certainly not aware. I don't know if Sam is of any particular
Sorry, I'm
ways
answering
of tracking it.
I'm answering a question in the chat at the minute, so I'm a little bit behind. But no, I mean, Caroline's absolutely right. It's a real black box at the minute, but there is kind of burgeoning research in this area as well. So it is worth having a look around for it as well. But the other kind of perspective that I think, and I'm going to post some links in the chat as well in a second, is the potential, and maybe it's a bit more hopeful note on which to end the session, for AI itself to help us to reduce our own kind of impacts, if you like, on our environment and our climate, by making things more efficient, by, you know, essentially kind of incorporating itself into processes that were otherwise analog, slower, less efficient, and kind of speeding them up. So, you know, there could be potential ways to sort of, and actually, obviously, I made this point a few weeks ago when I did another session on ethics and sustainability and the use of AI. And someone pointed out that the better the technology gets, the less energy it's going to use, in theory. And so we can't predict that. It is possible. It might suck at the minute, but there is potential for it to both help us and also get better. And yeah, there's no kind of hard and fast rule for monitoring your own kind of output. If there is a I guess a hard and fast rule, it would be to kind of check with the AI you're using, and if it has got a kind of sustainability statement, if it does kind of broadcast exactly how much energy it uses, the more it gets embedded into companies that are a little bit more socially responsible, the more likely that's going to be. So to keep looking, and actually I think it kind of comes down to the similar kind of process we tell our students when they do stuff on Google, when they search for anything across the internet. Look where you're getting your source from, who's written it, is it reliable, is it trustworthy, is it recent? All the questions that we tend to ask ourselves when we search for stuff on the internet can also apply to this, I think, as well. Are you using a company that is at least reputable? Your definition of what that means might change depending on who you are and what discipline you're in, but there is definitely going to be a hierarchy with the different kinds of AI you're using, and is it more likely to have a kind of efficient way of generating information, or is it going to be something that's running off of something that's absolutely damaging and probably running off a diesel generator or something like that? So yeah, there are questions you can ask yourself. I guess it's one of those things where you just kind of have to keep looking. And eventually they'll get more and more of it. But the more it gets embedded into our everyday kind of use of technology, the more responsible we're going to have to be with it. So I guess it's a hopeful note to say that we're going to have to get better if it's going to stick around, I think. Some more comments in the chat as well. I'm just going to reply to too.